August 31, 1943, 0612 hours, 18,000 feet above Marcus Island, Pacific Ocean. Lieutenant Saburo Sakai of the Imperial Japanese Navy squinted into the rising sun, searching for the American fighters his formation had been warned about. At 27 years old, Sakai was already a Legend 64 confirmed aerial victories, survivor of countless battles from China to the Solomon Islands, one of the greatest fighter pilots Japan had ever produced. His Mitsubishi A6M50 fighter, tail number UI-105, responded to his touch like an extension of his body after 3 years of combat flying. Below his formation of 12 Zeros, the American carrier task force steamed northward, their anti-aircraft fire creating black clouds that the Japanese fighters danced through with practiced ease. Sakai had fought Americans before, Wildcats over Guadalcanal, some early model Corsairs, various patrol bombers. He respected American courage but not their aircraft or tactics. American fighters were heavy, crude machines flown by pilots with minimal training. Quality versus quantity, and quality always prevailed in individual combat. "Bandits, 10 o'clock high," his wingman transmitted, voice tight with adrenaline. Sakai looked up and felt his breath catch. Diving from 22,000 feet came 8 American fighters of a type he had never seen. They were dark blue, almost black, with distinctive bent wings and enormous radial engines. But it was their dive speed that shocked him. They were coming down at velocities no fighter should achieve. Their attack run timed with precision that suggested experienced pilots, not the barely trained Americans Japan's intelligence had promised. The lead American fighter opened fire at 800 meters, far beyond effective range for the light guns most fighters carried. 6 streams of tracer fire converged on a zero in Sakai's peripheral vision. The aircraft didn't just catch fire, it disintegrated. Pieces of wing, chunks of fuselage, fragments of pilot scattered across the sky in less than 2 seconds. The sheer volume of fire was unprecedented in Sakai's experience. "Break! Break!" Sakai screamed into his radio, throwing his Zero into a hard left turn. The nimble Japanese fighter responded instantly, turning inside the American's flight path with ease. This was how you survived against heavier enemies. Use your maneuverability advantage. Force them into turning fights where their weight became a liability. But the American didn't try to turn with him. The dark blue fighter pulled up sharply, converting its dive speed into a vertical climb that carried it 3,000 feet above Sakai's position in seconds. The Zero, light and agile, couldn't follow such a climb without bleeding off speed dangerously. Sakai watched in frustrated disbelief as the American pilot reached the top of his climb, rolled over, and dove again on another Zero. The second Japanese fighter exploded exactly like the first. A 2-second burst of that concentrated fire and 3,000 pounds of aircraft and pilot became burning debris. No dramatic dogfight, no extended combat. Just mechanical destruction delivered with industrial efficiency. What Sakai was witnessing was the Grumman F6F Hellcat's combat debut, and it represented the complete transformation of American naval aviation from a force of brave but outmatched pilots into a killing machine that would systematically destroy Japanese air power through overwhelming combination of firepower, durability, and numbers. The Hellcat hadn't existed 2 years earlier. In May 1941, as Japanese pilots perfected their tactics in China, Grumman Aircraft Engineering Corporation was designing a fighter to replace their F-4F Wildcat, which was already proving inferior to the Zero in early Pacific encounters. Grumman's design team, led by Chief Engineer William Schwentler, studied every combat report available, analyzed captured Zero components, and interviewed pilots who had faced Japanese fighters. What emerged from their analysis wasn't an attempt to outmaneuver the Zero. That was impossible within weight constraints needed for carrier operations. Instead, they designed a fighter that would make maneuverability irrelevant through overwhelming firepower, pilot protection, and performance at critical combat parameters. The XF6F-1 prototype first flew on June 26, 1942. It was enormous by fighter standards, 13,228 pounds loaded, nearly twice the weight of a Zero. Its Pratt & Whitney R-2800 double WASP engine produced 2,000 horsepower, more than twice the Zero's Nakajima Sakai engine output. Most dramatically, it carried 6.50 caliber Browning M2 machine guns with 400 rounds per gun, 2,400 rounds total, enough ammunition for 40 seconds of sustained fire. To Japanese pilots accustomed to the Zero's two 7.7mm machine guns and two 20mm cannons with 60 rounds each, the Hellcat's ammunition capacity seemed wasteful, excessive. American pilots called it adequate. The Hellcat program moved from prototype to production with speed that would have been impossible in Japan's aircraft industry. First flight in June 1942, carrier trials in July, production order in August, first production aircraft delivered in October, first combat squadron equipped by January 1943, combat debut by August 1943. 14 months from prototype to combat. A timeline that Japanese manufacturers, with their craftsman-based production methods, couldn't approach. Grumman's Bethpage, Long Island factory retooled for Hellcat production using methods borrowed from automotive manufacturing. Assembly line techniques, interchangeable parts, specialized workstations, semi-skilled labor performing repetitive tasks. By late 1943, Grumman was producing 500 Hellcats per month. At peak production in 1945, output would reach 600 aircraft monthly. More fighters from one factory than Japan's entire industry produced. But Lieutenant Sakai, fighting for his life above Marcus Island, knew nothing of American production statistics. He only knew that the dark blue fighters attacking his formation combined capabilities no aircraft should possess. They were faster than Zeros in level flight and dives. They could outclimb Zeros above 10,000 feet. Their firepower destroyed Japanese aircraft with single bursts. And most troubling, when damaged, they absorbed punishment that would have annihilated a Zero. Sakai managed to get on the tail of one Hellcat during the chaotic combat. He fired a perfect deflection shot from 200 meters, saw his 20mm cannon shells explode against the American fighter's wing root and fuselage. In his 3 years of combat, such hits meant certain kills. The American fighter should have caught fire, broken apart, or at minimum lost control. Instead, the Hellcat rolled hard right, dove away trailing smoke, and disappeared into clouds at 8,000 feet. Damaged certainly, but not destroyed. Sakai had no time to follow. Another Hellcat was attacking his wingman. The combat lasted 11 minutes. When it ended, 7 Zeros were destroyed, 2 more damaged so badly their pilots barely reached base. The Hellcats lost 0 aircraft, though several showed combat damage. Sakai landed at Marcus Island's airstrip with his hands shaking, not from fear, but from the realization that everything had changed. The Americans had produced a fighter that negated every advantage Japanese pilots had relied upon. Speed? The Hellcat was faster. Climb? The Hellcat climbed better above 10,000 feet. Firepower? 6 heavy machine guns with unlimited ammunition made Japanese armament look like target practice weapons. Durability? Hellcats absorbed damage that obliterated Zeros. Only in maneuverability did the Zero retain advantage, and the American pilots didn't dogfight. They used speed and altitude to dictate engagement terms, attacked in coordinated pairs, and broke off combat when disadvantaged. This wasn't the individualistic, honor-focused aerial combat Japanese pilots trained for. This was industrial warfare, systematic, coordinated, ruthlessly efficient. That evening, Sakai wrote in his diary, "Today I fought American fighters superior to our Zero in almost every parameter except turn radius. They are flown by pilots who refuse to engage in turning combat, who use tactics that maximize their advantages while minimizing ours. Most disturbing, there were 8 of them against our 12, yet they destroyed 7 of our aircraft without loss. If the Americans can produce such fighters in quantity, our numerical advantage will not save us." Sakai's assessment was accurate, but he dramatically underestimated the scale of American production. By the time he wrote those words, Grumman had already delivered over 1,500 Hellcats to the Navy. Production was accelerating. The aircraft that had seemed so formidable in small numbers would soon blacken Pacific skies in formations of hundreds. The Hellcat's design revealed American thinking about aerial warfare that was fundamentally different from Japanese philosophy. While Japanese designers obsessed over maneuverability and range, accepting minimal armor and fuel tank protection to save weight, American designers prioritized pilot survival and sustained combat capability. The Hellcat pilot sat behind a 212-pound armor plate that could stop 20mm cannon shells. The windscreen was 2-inch bulletproof glass. Armor plates protected from below and sides. Self-sealing fuel tanks, introduced after early war experience, showed how easily Zeros burned, prevented fuel fires even when punctured multiple times. The cockpit was spacious, controls were standardized with other American fighters, visibility was excellent in all directions. To Japanese pilots, these features represented wasteful weight that degraded performance. To American designers, they represented investment in the pilot, the most difficult component to replace. A Hellcat might cost $50,000 to build and could be replaced in a month. The pilot cost 2 years of training and was irreplaceable if killed. This philosophy extended to the Hellcat's ammunition capacity. Japanese fighters carried enough ammunition for perhaps 20 seconds of sustained fire because designers assumed expert pilots would need only brief bursts to destroy enemies. American designers assumed combat would involve longer engagements, extended firing passes, and pilots with varying skill levels. They provided ammunition for 40 seconds of fire because pilot survival mattered more than weight savings. The results were stark. A Zero pilot who missed his first pass had perhaps 3 more attempts before running out of cannon ammunition. A Hellcat pilot could make a dozen passes and still have ammunition remaining. In extended combat, Japanese fighters became progressively less dangerous as ammunition depleted. Hellcats maintained lethal capability throughout the engagement. By October 1943, more Hellcat squadrons were reaching the Pacific, and combat results were confirming the aircraft's devastating effectiveness. VF-6, operating from USS Intrepid, achieved 27 kills without loss in its first month of combat. VF-9 from USS Essex destroyed 43 Japanese aircraft in November while losing 3 Hellcats, a 14-to-1 kill ratio that Japanese commanders initially refused to believe. Commander David McCampbell, who would become the Navy's top ace with 34 victories, all in Hellcats, described the aircraft's advantages. "The F6F gave us everything we needed to kill Zeros and stay alive. We were faster, so we controlled engagement range. We could outclimb them above 10,000 feet, so we controlled altitude advantage. Our guns delivered overwhelming firepower. A 2-second burst would saw a Zero in half. Most importantly, we could take damage and keep fighting. I watched Zero pilots put 20mm shells into Hellcats, see them smoking and leaking fluids, and assume they'd killed us. Then we'd return fire and blow them apart. Their aircraft was made of aluminum and tissue paper. Ours was made of armor plate and American steel. Not really a fair fight once we had the Hellcat. But what truly doomed Japanese air power wasn't the Hellcat's individual superiority. It was American production capacity that turned air combat into a mathematical equation Japan couldn't solve. In 1943, Grumman produced 2,545 Hellcats. Japan's entire aviation industry produced approximately 16,693 aircraft of all types: fighters, bombers, transports, trainers. The United States produced 85,898 aircraft that same year, including 23,988 fighters of various types. American fighter production alone exceeded Japan's total aircraft production. In 1944, Hellcat production reached 6,139 aircraft. Japan's total aircraft production that year, 28,180, but declining in quality as experienced workers were drafted, factories were bombed, and material shortages forced substitution of inferior components. American production reached 96,318 aircraft, with fighters and bombers of increasing sophistication. By 1945, as Japan's industry collapsed under bombardment and blockade, Grumman was still producing 500 Hellcats monthly despite the war's approaching end. Total Hellcat production from 1942 to 1945, 12,275 aircraft. Japan's famous Zero fighter, 10,939 total production from 1940 to 1945, including all variants across multiple factories. The Americans had produced more of one fighter type in 3 years than Japan produced of its most important fighter in 5 years. And the Hellcat was just one of several American naval fighters. There were also F-4U Corsairs, which would be produced in nearly equal numbers. Lieutenant Sakai encountered this production disparity throughout 1944 as he fought in the Philippines defense. Every morning, more American fighters appeared. Every engagement cost Japan irreplaceable pilots while American squadrons seemed to regenerate overnight. He shot down 5 Hellcats between September and November 1944, achieving victories that would have made him a hero earlier in the war. They meant nothing strategically. For every Hellcat Sakai destroyed, Grumman delivered 20 new ones. For every Japanese pilot who became an ace, 10 experienced pilots died without replacement. The mathematics were impossible. The Battle of the Philippine Sea in June 1944 demonstrated the Hellcat's dominance with brutal clarity. Japanese naval aviation, gathered for a decisive blow against the American fleet, launched 373 aircraft from their carriers on June 19th. They faced approximately 450 Hellcats, plus Corsairs and other fighters, in what became known as the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. The result was massacre. Japanese aircraft losses, approximately 330 aircraft destroyed in one day. American losses, 29 aircraft, mostly to anti-aircraft fire, only a handful to Japanese fighters. The kill ratio approached 11-1 in favor of the Americans. More devastating than the numerical losses was the quality of pilots killed. Japan had committed its remaining experienced carrier pilots to this battle, hoping veteran skill would overcome numerical disadvantage. Failed. Experience couldn't compensate for flying aircraft inferior to enemy equipment, lacking armor protection, carrying insufficient ammunition, supported by an industrial base that couldn't replace losses. After the battle, Japanese carrier aviation effectively ceased to exist as a fighting force. The carriers survived. They had aircraft, but no experienced pilots to fly them. Training new carrier pilots took 2 years minimum. Japan didn't have 2 years, and even if they did, they couldn't produce fuel to train new pilots in sufficient quantities. One Japanese pilot who survived the Philippine Sea Battle, Lieutenant Junior Grade Yosuke Tsubaki, left a diary entry that captured the psychological devastation. "We are fighting American machines, not American pilots. Their aircraft are so superior that pilot skill becomes secondary. I have 400 hours of combat time, have trained for 3 years, am one of our better pilots. The American who killed my wingman today probably had 100 hours total flight time, maybe 2 months of combat. His aircraft made the difference. He dove from above, we couldn't climb to his altitude. He fired from 600 meters, our guns are effective to 300 meters. His burst lasted 3 seconds and destroyed a zero completely. Our return fire hit his aircraft multiple times. He flew away trailing smoke. Fair combat requires equal weapons. We no longer have equal weapons. Worse is knowing that for every American fighter we destroy, 2 more arrive tomorrow. The carrier that launched the fighter which killed my wingman has 90 more. There are 6 American carriers in this battle. Next month there will be 8. By autumn, perhaps 12. We have 4 carriers remaining and cannot replace losses. This is not war. This is industrial execution. The industrial execution continued throughout 1944 and 1945 as American carriers operating dozens of Hellcats each systematically destroyed Japanese air power. The pattern repeated at Iwo Jima, Okinawa, and in attacks on the Japanese home islands. Massive American fighter formations sweeping aside numerically inferior Japanese defenders equipped with increasingly obsolete aircraft. By early 1945, Japan's response to Hellcat superiority was kamikaze attacks. If Japanese pilots couldn't survive air combat anyway, better to die taking an enemy ship with them. This tactical desperation confirmed how completely the Hellcat had negated Japanese fighter effectiveness. When your only effective tactic is suicide attacks, you've already lost the war. The kamikaze campaign initially achieved some success through surprise and determination. But even here, American industrial capacity provided the answer. More carriers, more fighters, more combat air patrols. By April 1945, American carriers routinely operated 150 to 200 aircraft each, with 72-hour combat air patrols of 50-plus fighters that kamikaze pilots had to penetrate before reaching ships. The mathematics made kamikaze success increasingly rare. Lieutenant Sakai, one of Japan's few surviving aces, participated in kamikaze defense missions in 1945. His diary entries from this period showed complete psychological collapse of the warrior ethos that had sustained Japanese pilots. March 15, 1945. I flew today with pilots who have 60 hours total flight time. They cannot land on carriers, can barely navigate, stall in simple turns. We call them pilots, but they are sacrifices. The Americans launch 100 fighters against our 15. They fly aircraft superior to ours in every way. They are experienced, confident, well-equipped. I shot down my 64th American aircraft today, a Hellcat that made a tactical error. I am one of perhaps 20 Japanese pilots remaining with more than 50 victories. Most pilots from 1942 are dead. Most pilots from 1943 are dead. Most pilots from 1944 are dead. I survived through luck, skill, and increasingly hopeless recognition that survival is temporary. The Americans lose pilots and replace them monthly. We lose pilots and replace them never. I have flown with 5 different wingmen in the past year. All dead. They gave me young pilots thinking my experience would protect them. Couldn't. Their aircraft were too slow, too weak, too fragile. My experience meant nothing when they faced Hellcats flown by competent American pilots. April 10, 1945. Today I watched 23 Hellcats attack our airfield. We launched 11 fighters to defend, 4 Zeros, 7 others cobbled from whatever aircraft remained functional. The combat lasted 9 minutes. 8 of our aircraft were destroyed. The Hellcats lost nothing, landed back on their carrier to rearm, and returned 3 hours later to attack again. I am 29 years old. I have survived 3 years of combat that killed every pilot I knew in 1942. I am considered an expert, a teacher, an ace. I am helpless. I fly aircraft that cannot compete with American fighters. I train pilots who die in their first combat. I watch an enemy with unlimited resources systematically destroy everything we work to build. Bushido teaches us that spirit conquers material disadvantage. This was true when enemies had similar resources. It is false when facing industrial capacity so overwhelming that spirit becomes irrelevant. The Americans do not fight with more spirit than we do. They fight with better aircraft, more aircraft, better training, unlimited fuel, unlimited ammunition, unlimited replacement pilots. We lose this war not because we lack courage. We lose because we cannot produce Hellcats. We cannot train enough pilots. We cannot replace losses. The mathematics doom us. Sakai survived the war, one of fewer than 100 Japanese pilots with more than 50 victories who lived to see surrender. His survival was statistical anomaly in a system that killed most pilots within months. The final Hellcat kill tallies told the story of American naval aviation dominance. Asterisk total Hellcat aerial victories, 5,223, credited. Asterisk total Hellcat losses in air combat, 270. Asterisk kill ratio, 19.3 to 1. This ratio meant that for every Hellcat lost in combat, nearly 20 Japanese aircraft were destroyed. No fighter in history achieved a better combat record. The Hellcat accounted for approximately 75% of all U.S. Navy aerial victories in World War II. Individual squadron statistics were even more extreme. Asterisk VF, 15. 310 kills. 11 losses, 28:1. Asterisk VF, 27. 174 kills. 4 losses, 43:1. Asterisk VF, 80. 152 kills. 3 losses, 50:1. Commander David McCampbell, flying Hellcats exclusively, shot down 34 Japanese aircraft without being shot down himself. This wasn't unique. 19 Navy pilots achieved ace status, 5+ victories, in a single Hellcat sortie. Such dominance was unprecedented in aerial warfare history. But individual achievements, impressive as they were, mattered less than systemic dominance. By 1945, Japanese pilots faced Hellcats in every engagement. There was no avoiding them, no alternative combat zone where Japanese aircraft might find easier opponents. American naval aviation was everywhere, equipped with Hellcats, destroying Japanese air power systematically. After the war, captured Japanese documents revealed how completely Hellcat superiority had destroyed Japanese aerial doctrine. A June 1945 Japanese Navy instruction manual, Tactics against Grumman F6F, revealed the desperation. The F6F Hellcat is superior to all Japanese fighters in speed, climb rate above 3,000 meters, firepower, armor protection, and dive performance. It equals or exceeds Japanese fighters in operational ceiling and range. It is inferior only in turning radius below 3,000 meters and slow-speed maneuverability. Recommended tactics. 1. Avoid combat if possible. The F6F's only weakness is limited operational range from carriers. If combat can be avoided until F6F must return to base, enemy threat is eliminated without engaging. 2. If combat unavoidable, force turning combat below 3,000 meters where Zero retains advantage. Accept casualties while maneuvering into favorable position. 3. Never engage above 5,000 meters where F6F performance advantage is overwhelming. 4. Concentrate multiple aircraft on single F6F. Accepted loss ratio, 4-to-1. Trading 4 Japanese aircraft for 1 F6F is acceptable given production disparities. 5. Attack F6F formations only when Japanese numerical superiority is 3:1 or greater. Even odds results in Japanese defeat. Warning to pilots. The F6F represents American industrial and technical superiority that Japanese industry cannot match. American pilot training is now equal to Japanese training. American tactics are sound. Survival depends on avoiding engagement on American terms. Victory requires accepting losses Japan can no longer sustain. This manual, essentially advising pilots to avoid combat with the primary enemy fighter, revealed the complete bankruptcy of Japanese air doctrine by war's end. When your tactical advice is, don't fight unless you outnumber them 3:1, you've already conceded defeat. The final production numbers told the story of industrial mismatch that doomed Japan. Grumman F6F Hellcat total production 12,275. Asterisk 1942. 10 aircraft. Asterisk 1943. 2,545 aircraft. Asterisk 1944. 6,139 aircraft. Asterisk 1945. 3,581 aircraft. Through September. Mitsubishi A6M0 total production 10,939. Asterisk 1940. 64 aircraft. Asterisk 1941. 740 aircraft. Asterisk 1942. 2,201 aircraft. Asterisk 1943. 3,373 aircraft. Asterisk 1944. 2,908 aircraft. Asterisk 1945. 1,653 aircraft. The Americans produced more Hellcats in 2 years, 1943 to 1944, than Japan produced Zeros in 6 years, and the Hellcat was superior to the Zero in almost every combat parameter. More devastating than the production numbers were the replacement rates. When an American carrier lost aircraft in combat, replacement aircraft and pilots arrived within weeks. VF-15, operating from USS Essex, lost 38 Hellcats in combat from October 1944 to January 1945. By February, the squadron had 72 aircraft, more than it started with. Losses not only replaced but exceeded. Japanese carriers that lost aircraft couldn't replace them. By 1945, Japan had carriers with empty decks. The ships existed, but neither aircraft nor pilots were available to operate from them. The carriers became floating targets, eventually sunk by American aircraft launched from carriers whose decks were overcrowded with Hellcats. The human cost was equally disparate. The United States trained approximately 60,000 naval aviators during World War II. Losses in combat: approximately 8,800 pilots killed or missing. Tragic, but replaceable from the training pipeline producing 2,000 plus new pilots monthly at peak. Japan trained approximately 11,000 naval aviators before and during the war. Combat losses: approximately 9,500 pilots killed or missing. Irreplaceable. By 1945, Japan's fuel shortage meant pilot training had collapsed. New pilots received as little as 30 hours flight time before being sent to combat. They were sacrifices, not effective combatants. The Battle of Okinawa in April-June 1945 demonstrated the final collapse. Japan committed 1,900 kamikaze aircraft and thousands of conventional fighters to destroying the American fleet. American carriers responded with continuous combat air patrols of 150-plus fighters, mostly Hellcats. The result: approximately 1,500 Japanese aircraft destroyed for the loss of 168 American aircraft, mostly to kamikaze hits on ships, not air combat losses. Even suicidal tactics couldn't overcome the mathematics. Kamikaze success rate: approximately 14% reached their targets. 4% sank ships. This meant Japan had to sacrifice roughly 25 aircraft and pilots to sink one American ship. The Americans had 40-plus carriers by April 1945. The mathematics of attrition made kamikaze warfare as futile as conventional combat. Lieutenant Sakai watched the final collapse from Japanese airfields where non-flyable aircraft accumulated faster than mechanics could repair them. His final diary entry, written on August 10, 1945, 5 days after Hiroshima, captured the complete destruction of Japanese aerial warfare. The war ends. We lost not because we lacked courage or skill or commitment. We lost because we could not produce Hellcats. That sentence summarizes 4 years of combat. In 1942, I flew Zeros superior to anything America possessed. By 1943, the Hellcat arrived and rendered our superiority obsolete. By 1944, we faced Hellcats in overwhelming numbers with no effective counter. By 1945, we faced Hellcats with pilots who had 30 hours training flying aircraft that barely functioned. I survived by being better than most pilots I faced. But being better than individual American pilots meant nothing when they flew superior aircraft, had unlimited ammunition, received excellent training, and could be replaced when killed. I shot down 64 American aircraft in 4 years. America produced 300,000-plus aircraft during the war. My victories were statistically meaningless. The Hellcat taught me that modern war is not won by warriors. It is won by factories. Japanese pilots were warriors. American pilots were factory workers in the sky, operating weapons produced by industrial systems we couldn't match. They won not through superior spirit but through superior production. Bushido promised that spirit would overcome material disadvantage. This was a lie or perhaps a truth from a different era. Against enemies with similar resources, spirit matters. Against enemies with 10 times your industrial capacity, spirit is a beautiful way to die but not a path to victory. I survived the war. Most of my comrades did not. They were better pilots than I was, more skilled, more brave, more committed. They died because they flew inferior aircraft against an enemy with unlimited resources. I lived through luck and the war ending before my luck ran out. The Americans won because they built Hellcats faster than we could train pilots. That is the entire story of the Pacific Air War, summarized in one sentence. Everything else, tactics, courage, sacrifice, was commentary on that fundamental truth. Sakai lived until 2000, dying at age 84. He became a lecturer on air combat history, meeting former American adversaries at reunions, including several Hellcat pilots he had fought against. In a 1995 interview, he reflected on the Hellcat's impact. The F6F was the aircraft that defeated Japan, not the atomic bomb that simply ended what was already lost. The Hellcat destroyed Japanese air power so completely that by 1945 we couldn't defend our own skies. I flew against it for 2 years. I learned to fear the sound of its engine, the sight of its distinctive wings. You could evade Hellcats individually, they turned poorly at low speed. But you couldn't evade formations of Hellcats supported by unlimited resources. They were everywhere, always in numbers, always well equipped. The aircraft itself was good but not exceptional. What made it unstoppable was American production. They built 12,000 Hellcats. If we shot one down, 2 more appeared. If we killed the pilot, another arrived already trained. We couldn't win a war of attrition against such capacity. Japanese military philosophy in 1941 assumed spirit would overcome material disadvantage. We were wrong. In modern industrial war, the side with more factories, more resources, more production capacity will win eventually. Individual courage becomes irrelevant when facing systematic industrial superiority. The Hellcat proved this. It was a good fighter made dominant by being produced in overwhelming numbers. That combination, adequate quality in massive quantity, defeated our philosophy of superior quality in limited quantity. The mathematics were simple and brutal. We learned this lesson too late. By the time we understood that industrial capacity determines victory in modern war, we had already lost. The Hellcats had already destroyed our Air Force. The factories that produced them had already outproduced our industry by factors we couldn't overcome. If I could go back to 1941 and tell Japanese leadership one thing, it would be this: do not fight America. Not because Americans are better warriors, they are not. But because American factories will bury you under an avalanche of adequate weapons produced in quantities you cannot imagine. The Hellcat was just one weapon in that avalanche. It was enough to destroy us. The Grumman F6F Hellcat flew its last combat mission on August 15, 1945, the day Japan surrendered. The aircraft had dominated Pacific skies for 2 years, achieving a kill ratio that would never be matched, destroying an entire enemy air force through combination of technical superiority and overwhelming numbers. But the Hellcat's real significance wasn't its combat record, impressive as it was. It was what the aircraft represented: American industrial capacity turned to military production. Adequate design, mass-produced, operated in overwhelming quantities by adequately trained pilots supported by unlimited resources. This formula defeated Japanese excellence through sheer mathematical superiority. In museums today, restored Hellcats sit beside Zeros, the 2 aircraft representing different philosophies of warfare. The Zero, lightweight, maneuverable, long-range, optimized for dogfighting, built by craftsmen. The Hellcat, heavy, durable, well-armed, optimized for killing Zeros, built on assembly lines. In 1942, the Zero was the better aircraft for individual combat. By 1945, the Hellcat had destroyed Japanese air power so completely that Zeros couldn't defend their homeland. The difference wasn't pilot quality or tactical doctrine. It was industrial capacity translated to overwhelming numerical superiority. Japanese pilots learned what German tankers learned facing T-34s, what German logistics officers learned examining jeeps, what German fighter pilots learned facing Thunderbolts. That quality means nothing when quantity is overwhelming. The Americans didn't beat Japan by building better individual fighters, though the Hellcat was better. They beat Japan by building 12,000 fighters while Japan built 10,000, and those 12,000 were superior individually. The mathematics doomed Japan from the beginning. They just didn't know it until Hellcats started filling Pacific skies in numbers that made resistance futile. By then, the lesson came too late to matter. The warriors had been defeated by the factories, and Bushido had been buried under an avalanche of American industrial production. The Hellcat wasn't the best fighter of World War II. That honor arguably belongs to the P-51 Mustang or the German FW-190D. But it was the most effective, achieving the highest kill ratio, destroying the most enemy aircraft, and contributing most decisively to victory in its theater. It did this not through transcendent excellence but through being good enough, produced fast enough, deployed in sufficient numbers. That was the American way of war, not elegant, not perfect, but overwhelming. The Hellcat exemplified it perfectly. And in doing so, it taught Japan the lesson that would reshape their post-war philosophy. That industrial capacity determines victory in modern warfare, and no amount of warrior spirit can overcome an enemy who can produce weapons faster than you can destroy them. The mathematics guarantee it.